Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about British politics in the day ahead in under 20 minutes.
It is Thursday, October the 3rd. My name is Jack Blanchard for Politico. With me, as you can hear, is Sam Coates from Sky News, and we are back home in London. The party conference season is over, Sam. You made it through. This is the first time, very telling this, that in however many weeks of doing this podcast, Sam Coates has sort of stumbled to the Zoom screen in a hoodie, looking very much not like a man who's about to get on air. Are you a little tired, Sam, having done the Lib Dems as well as the Labour and the Tory conference?
And a day at the TEC. Yes, it's a glorious homecoming. The cats and the kids appeared pleased briefly to see me. But it's always one of the trickiest times of year. So thank you to all the partners and sort of people who made it happen, because we're away for so much of the time at this early stage of the autumn.
We haven't seen Bob the cat for a while, have we? When I was walking around Tory conference the day before yesterday, at least two people stopped to ask me about your cat, who has now become something of a celebrity in the political geek world. Is he around? Is he in the kitchen today?
He's just popped outside, but if I don't feed him, he's more likely to appear. So it's treats for appearances. I think is the way it works. Freebies for Bob.
A theme of today's show, exactly. Freebies for Bob. Well, look, I mean, obviously, Sam, the Middle East is still the backdrop that's dominating everything, and we've had airstrikes in the centre of Beirut overnight, meters away from Lebanon's Parliament building. That is obviously an enormous story that is still moving very, very quickly, although we haven't yet seen any response, any military response from Israel to the attack from Iran. I don't want to focus on the war today because I feel there'll be plenty and plenty of podcasts when we are doing. I think we should talk about domestic matters. Sam, what are the two big things we should discuss?
Well, I had thought that we might be talking about Boris Johnson's interview on the BBC, but it appears that they accidentally sent the notes for the interview, sort of the questions, to Boris Johnson, so they, in a late night statement, the BBC cancelled the whole thing. I had thought...
I feel so bad for Laura Kuenssberg. Can you imagine that moment? I mean, we've all done it, right? Where you've sent the message to the wrong person and you get that sick feeling in your stomach of like, oh my God, this is like the ultimate moment of doing that on the sort of public stage. It's harsh, very harsh. But, you know, honesty and integrity. BBC will not do the interview with Boris Johnson having seen the notes. So, you know, good for them.
I had thought we might be talking about the wash-up from Keir Starmer's first meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. But I have to say that was overshadowed by the top item that we're going to talk about today, which is the kind of enormous number of different strands around Freebie Gate, which roared back onto the front pages this morning after the publication of the latest register of members' interest, the announcement of an investigation into Lord Ali, and the announcement that the Prime Minister is paying back £6,000 plus of freebies that he got. And I think that today is the day where lobbying begins in earnest of Tory MPs ahead of next week's votes on Wednesday and Thursday for the Tory leadership. So we're going to talk about the wash-up from that and where that contest goes ahead of the two MP knockout stages next week. Do you want to kick off, Jack, with a bit about how we ended up talking about Freebie Gate again on this day where you can actually set the political agenda for days ahead because the party conference season is over. The government had effectively had a moment to take back control of the news agenda, but they can't possibly have wanted this set of headlines.
Well, I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because as you say, it is in the government's gift to set the news agenda. You can announce stuff. You can do stuff, guys. You can make us talk about the stuff you want to make us talk about. And yet, on Wednesday afternoon with the Tory conference, just after Tory conference had wrapped up, they did indeed do something and announce something. They announced that Keir Starmer was paying back £6,000 worth of gifts just before he walked into a press conference in Brussels. And therefore, here we are all talking about that again. It is on most of the front pages today, knocking any prospect of the Tories being on the front page, because now we're all going to talk about this story yet again. It is the story that will not die. Downing Street cannot kill it. And to my mind, they have just reopened the whole thing again. The timing of it appears to have been because the Parliament published the new updated MPs Register of Interests yesterday afternoon, which shows a whole load of new gifts, not just for Labour, but for all MPs have to declare their outside earnings and hospitality and any gifts they've received on that register, and it's updated periodically. And Downing Street took that opportunity to say that Keir Starmer has chosen to pay back not because he's broken any rules, but because he feels he should pay back more than £6,000 worth of gifts and hospitality that he received. They are covering tickets to see Taylor Swift at a concert in London, tickets to the Doncaster races, and for some sort of clothing rental agreement with a designer who had loaned clothes to his wife. However, Keir Starmer is not paying back another £40,000 worth of gifts of clothing and glasses and football tickets that he received before he became Prime Minister. They seem to have drawn a sort of imaginary line in Downing Street between things that he thinks he should pay back and things that he thinks he shouldn't pay back. But there's no real big official explanation of how this is all being figured out. And to my mind, it just reopens the story and raises a load more questions about the Prime Minister's judgment. Is he now accepting he's done something wrong? Why was it okay before, but it's not okay now? And most importantly, Sam, what about all his other ministers? Are they all now going to have to pay back things that they've taken gifts for? Because, is it one rule for Keir Starmer and another rule for the rest of the cabinet? Or what exactly? And these are the sort of questions that are now going to be kicked around for the rest of the day as another news cycle is dominated by this story.
I mean, the timing was gruesome. The confirmation of the paying back some of the freebie gifts came just an hour or so before Keir Starmer did a press conference with Ursula von der Leyen. I'm looking at the transcript of that press conference right now, and it's gruesome because the Prime Minister feels like he is fundamentally unprepared. The first 4 questions of that press conference, in one way or another, were about his acceptance of freebies or the Lord's investigation into Wahid Ali over some form of declaration. And he sounds deeply uncomfortable. He doesn't have a great deal to say about it, and it's quite clear that he doesn't want that to be the topic of the press conference, but his team have made it the topic of the press conference. But more generally, I mean, it's important to say we will go through, over the next few days, other MPs' declarations. A lot of people say, why do you focus on Keir Starmer? Well, we'll go through everybody else, but Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister who appears to have a particularly unusual enthusiasm for accepting freebies. And I've been going through the register, just looking at what was published yesterday. So this is effectively there's a month's worth of declarations. And I have to say, Jack, the scale and the quantum of what he takes is the thing that sort of takes my breath away. It's £1,000 worth of hospitality for a football match for a couple of tickets. It's £6,000 for clothing and personal support to Vic Starmer from Wahid Ali. It's another £2,800 for apparently a second visit to Taylor Swift. And on and on and on it goes. The weekend where the Sunday Times did one of the big stories about Freebiegate was a weekend, that was the 14th and 15th of September. That was a weekend where on the 14th of September, he took £1,900 to go to the races in Doncaster. And then the next day, he took nearly £1,000 to go to Tottenham. I mean, is it normal that people go on that scale of kind of a sort of hospitality bender? There is just things can be within the rules, but there is a question of scale, and this comes almost a month after the media started revealing the whole issue of freebies and donors might be a problem. It was August the 24th that the Sunday Times did their very first kind of passes for glasses, as they would call it. They revealed that Wahid Ali had a Downing Street pass, albeit briefly, and that he had given £20,000 of clothing, and including pairs of fancy spectacles to Keir Starmer. Yet there he is, kind of almost a month later, doing the double in a weekend of extraordinarily high-end hospitality events of the sort that almost nobody normal would do. I think there's a stubbornness. I think what this shows is a stubbornness of Keir Starmer in the face of criticism, which may prove a very valuable asset for him in time as Prime Minister. But the lack of sensitivity to media coverage, which can be the first red flag that there could be a problem, and undoubtedly by paying back the money, they are conceding that it is a problem. Maybe he can pay more attention.
I would argue there's something much bigger going on than an individual trip to a football match or whatever. I feel like this is much part of a much bigger and more important story, frankly, than any of these individual issues, which is about Labour's lack of preparation for government. A party that was brilliantly prepared for an election campaign and completely unprepared for what was going to happen afterwards. Labour talked in opposition about setting up an ethics and integrity commission, about cleaning up government after the sort of scandals of the Boris Johnson era, and they came in with absolutely no plan to do it, and clearly no thought had been given to it. In 3 months in, nobody knows what's happened to this Ethics and Integrity Commission or what it's going to look like or even who's supposed to be leading on it. They still haven't appointed an anti-corruption czar, a position that's been empty in government now for over 2 years. They positioned themselves in opposition very, wisely, given the way that Boris Johnson was viewed as people who were going to come in and clean politics up. But they haven't given any thought at all to how they actually do that beyond making pious statements to cameras in opposition. And therefore, without a plan, they have failed to hit the ground running on that, just as they failed to hit the ground running on loads of other stuff. And here they are falling over their feet straight away. And I just think it tells a bigger story about what happens if you are so focused on winning, which, completely understandably after 14 years in opposition, but you also need a clear plan for what happens afterwards. And that just obviously wasn't there. And that's why they've had such a difficult first few months in power. And, time is running out for them to get this right, because it's still early days, but people do make up their minds quite quickly about governments and prime ministers. People do just sort of get a first impression and then they go with it. And so I think Keir Starmer needs to bring the changes, and I don't think that what we've seen announced yesterday is going to put this to bed.
No, I mean, when you consider that we've now this week had the departure of the cabinet secretary, but there is still a weeks-long process to replace him. There is no lead official in number 10. The PPS in number 10 isn't there. Elizabeth Perlman moved on. We have no successor as yet. You have genuinely quite aggressive briefings at the top of government, different bits briefing against each other. Quite a lot of what has been going on about Freebie Gate has been laid at Sue Gray's door. I'm sure she would deny it, but there are people at the top of government said that she is kind of close to him and she was the one that granted the pass. And also, she, as a former ethics czar, I think is somebody who people expected they could entrust the question of standards to, and yet she appears not to have stepped in at any point and felt the need to deal with this. Interestingly, one person told me that when she was working as a civil servant in previous governments, she very much saw it as her job to facilitate ministers in things that they did, rather than being the kind of arbiter for senior figures in government. To sort of, she was the ultimate fixer rather than the ultimate blocker, depending on just how senior you were. So I think the role she plays in this is fascinating and will come under scrutiny today.
Let's talk about the Tories, Sam, because we've went up there and spent however many days in Birmingham, and we really do deserve to give them a bit of a debrief, because I would say the last day of Tory conference was far more interesting than I had expected. I kind of thought that the four big speeches at the end might be a bit of a damp squib, given that that we'd seen so much of the four leadership candidates over the period. But no, it feels like we did get a bit of a moment yesterday. The pretty much universally agreed, certainly by the Westminster bubble version of events, was that James cleverly pulled it out the bag and won the hall for whatever that's worth. Got by far the best reception, by far the biggest ovation. Seemed to connect with the Tory members and the people in the crowd more than any of the other three contenders, and it really feels like he has changed the game this week. We were saying yesterday that it had been a good week for him because he was suddenly much more of a contender rather than stuck in a sort of the two outsiders category, and it feels like he's cemented that position. I mean, he was describing himself, Sam, as the front runner yesterday afternoon, which feels a little bit of a stretch, but nevertheless, he's very much in the picture now, and it would be something of a surprise if he didn't make it to the final two. There's certainly three people battling very hard to get into that final two, so it was much better yesterday than I thought it would be, and it really feels wide open when Tory MPs vote next Wednesday and Thursday on who is going to be in those final two candidates.
That's right. Tom Tugendhat's speech didn't feel like the game changer that he needed to pull out of the bag in order to get in the final four. I think some around him were a bit disappointed with how it went down in the hall. Robert Jenrick, well, I have to say, he did his speech with no notes, but you wouldn't have noticed because all the candidates were using autocue. So he clearly spent hours memorising his pitch to the members. At its heart, he had kind of immigration and was saying the things I think that, polling suggests that the Tory members want to hear. But I was really struck that he reached for lines about Margaret Thatcher, which you would have thought are the sort of, absolute crowd pleasers. But even they didn't go down in the hall quite as well as I was expecting. And I don't know whether that's because finally the Tory party are getting over Thatcher or because actually he just didn't quite feel like a big enough person in the room. Kemi Badenoch, well, she delivers an eye-catching speech. She really does. And whether it was the opening where she said, for too long, politicians have told the parties and public what they want to hear, and then they've gone off and done their own thing. And I say enough. You can see how her pitch, her substance is the most attractive to members in theory. But she just, once again, was incredibly punchy. In her speech, she promised to reconsider every aspect of what the state does. Everything, Jack. She promised to review everything, as one person in the Tory party put it acidly afterwards. We don't have enough short money, i.e. funding, to really do that. And so James Cleverly, whose warm and kind of optimistic speech seemed to carry the day. And when the herd moves, the herd moves. There was a great line in it, let's be more normal. It would be quite something if the candidate going, let's be more normal, then doesn't get elected.
It's certainly not an enormous amount of normality normally at Tory conference, I have to say. I was chatting to one of Cleverly's closest aides during the week in Birmingham, and I said to them, trying to be a bit provocative as you do in these conversations to get them to say something interesting. And I said to them, well, you're obviously not going to win here because the Tory members always pick the most right-wing candidate, don't they? And they said, no, blah, blah, David Cameron in 2005. And I said, yeah, but David Cameron in 2005, he'd already lost 2 elections to get the sort of membership to that point of, we better pick someone a bit more sensible this time. And the way they pitched it was that the Tories have been through that process already. They've already had their lurch to the right, as in Liz Truss, and they've already had their Michael Howard return to the sort of vaguely centre but not very good moment under Rishi Sunak, and we're now ready for the David Cameron moment already, as in we've sort of been through this thought process already. We're not going to lurch to the right in opposition because we already did it in government, and actually sort of mentally the Tory party is ready for a more centrist leader in the shape of James Cleverly. Now, I've no idea if that's true or not, but the Sky polling, which is one of the most interesting things to come out of this week, the Sky YouGov polling of Tory members did show that James Cleverly would be very, very close to Robert Jenrick in a head-to-head, and that was before he captured the conference's imagination with this big speech, and that must have boosted him a few percentage points, you would think. So he's very much in the game, but the truth is nobody knows how the voting is going to break down amongst Tory MPs next week. It's really, really, really hard to call which of those three, and you assume it would be 2 of those 3, Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch and James Cleverly, makes it into the final 2, and we will have to wait for the back end of next week to find out.
Talking of that polling for Sky that YouGov did of Tory members, the people who vote, there's one finding that perhaps didn't get very much attention, not least because of events elsewhere, and it's this. We asked the candidate, what's more important, being best positioned to beat Labour at the next election or representing true conservative values, right? And the proportion of Tory members who think that it's more important to beat Labour is 31%. And the proportion who think it's more important that the Tory party leader represents Tory values is 62%. In other words, the Tory members were telling YouGov, for us, by a 2-to-1 margin, that being true to Tory principles was more important than winning the next election, which I found an incredible result and might make it more difficult for James Cleverly to win in the face of Kemi Badenoch saying a lot that the members want to hear in terms of ideology. But that's the battle that the Cleverly team have to overcome. But that's quite a finding, I thought.
Well, indeed, and you can expect them all to be hitting the phones over the weekend with Parliament in recess, trying to round up those Tory MPs to vote for them before next week. Parliament will be back on Monday, and you and I will be back on Monday morning as well, Sam, and I will look forward to seeing you then. I hope you have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Same to you. See you on Monday morning, Jack.